We didn't want to create any villains. That said, they're all messy and complicated, and they have flaws, and they're making questionable choices at different points, but at the end of the day, they're all good people. They're just kind of going through it, but hopefully the messiness of it all just makes them feel much more relatable and human.
It's like an anti-rom-com and an ode to rom-coms kind of rolled into one.
We wanted to tap into some of the classics from the 80s and 90s, movies like When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, My Best Friend's Wedding.
But then what if you actually found yourself in that situation today in 2020, 23?
Allie?
Sean!
Hi, Allison. How are you?
There he is. Hi, Alex. Good to see you.
You too. Been a big fan of yours for a long time, and I've loved so many of your projects. And after The Rental and then this coming up, I'm like, okay, this is a big 180 from that project in a different direction. And from the beginning, I was not expecting it to be what it was. It's so good. I really love this movie.
Thank you.
It's like an anti-romantic comedy. Like it is a romantic comedy, but it doesn't play by the same rules. It goes in a different direction. Where did this idea come from?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you put it that way because I actually think it's both. It's like an anti-rom-com and an ode to rom-coms kind of rolled into one. The idea started more from a place of talking about going back home to your hometown. Dave and I were up in Palo Alto where he grew up, taking a walk from his high school to his mom's house, where usually when we're up in Palo Alto, we sleep at his mom's house in his childhood bedroom that is still covered in baseball cards and, soccer trophies and like basketball posters. Anyway, just kind of thinking about what happens when you go home, when you see people from your past, even if you're not at home, right? You run into an ex and like that time in your life flashes before your eyes and you can't help but sort of compare where you were then to where you are now and how you feel about it. So that was part of the way in for sure. And also we did just want to make something in the romantic comedy space. I think, like you said, after The Rental, leaning into horror, I loved working on that with Dave, and I thought he did such a great job. And it was sort of like, let's shake things up. I think these are basically our two favorite genres. So we swung back into the rom-com space. We were really inspired by all of those rom-coms that we grew up watching in the 80s and 90s and wanted to kind of tap into that feeling.
Maybe there's a romantic comedy horror film in the future for the two of you then.
I hope so.
I still think about what would have happened if you hadn't left all those years ago.
I've been kind of wondering the same thing recently. Like if maybe I made the wrong decision.
I was not prepared that you're the guy who directed it because when you think romantic comedies, you're not necessarily thinking of the guy who directed The Rental, which was obviously not a romantic comedy, but it doesn't really fit the romantic comedy expectation. It is very much a realistic story, and it kind of, there's a line in there where I think it was Cassidy, and she says, this better not be my best friend's wedding kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you are trying to not be like an anti-romantic comedy. Was that kind of what you were going for with this?
In a way, I mean, I think it's more about how Allison and I, we genuinely love the genre, and we wanted to tap into some of the classics from the 80s and 90s, movies like When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, My Best Friend's Wedding, and kind of take the energy of those films that feel like these amazing comfort movies, but then obviously modernize it and have characters that exist in the world today, and almost use like what we know and love about romantic comedies to lead the audience down a certain path where they might think like, oh, I know where this is going, but then pulling the rug out from under them and hopefully subverting expectations and keeping people on their toes every step of the way.
Hey. What a wonderful thing for us all to be here. So thank you to the bride and groom for giving us a reason to celebrate. To Sean and Cassidy.
Now, the other thing that struck me a lot when watching this is just how real things feel. And it's like there's moments where it feels like you've got a zany plot that you would see in a rom-com. I'm going to come up with this master plan, but things don't go the way that they would in a romantic comedy. And it just feels these characters are real. Did you kind of base these on people that you had both encountered in your lives, or where did these characters come from?
A little bit. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of aspects of Allie that are drawn from my personal life and from my own struggle with my type A behavior and kind of trying to reconcile that against the free spirit that I think I am and the artist and what how I'm trying to kind of push boundaries creatively and sort of not letting yourself fall into a funk in that way or get pushed too far in a direction in your field that you don't feel like is true to yourself. And then just in general, well, some of the characters were actually written specifically for people in the movie, like Danny Pudi's character, and we can talk more about that later. But even Haley Joel Osment we had in mind while we were writing that role. Julie Haggerty was definitely in our mind while we were writing that role. In terms of the main characters, I think Dave and I are actors, and a lot of the way that we write is workshopping dialogue and trying to make things feel as real and grounded as possible and kind of, relating back, like I was saying, to these rom-coms of the 80s and 90s that we love, we're sort of like, but then what if you actually found yourself in that situation today in 2020, 23, in 2023, kind of like looking at it through a modern lens, knowing everything we know now, having watched all the rom-coms that we've watched.
Right.
What do those conversations really look like? What do those messy circumstances really look like? And how can we keep every character grounded and complex and like everyone's having their own emotional journey?
I haven't felt that free in I don't even know how long.
Sean, honey.
Mom, hey.
Allie?
Jojo!
These feel like real characters. These don't feel like movie characters. These feel like people that you would actually know and get to meet when you go back to your hometown. How did you kind of find this story? But did you start it? Did Alison start it? Where did the story really build from?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I appreciate you saying that. These characters, our goal from the get-go was we didn't want to create any villains. That said, they're all messy and complicated, and they have flaws, and they're making questionable choices at different points. But at the end of the day, they're all good people. They're just kind of going through it. But hopefully, the messiness of it all just makes them feel much more relatable and human. But then getting to your other question of just how it came about, we were walking through, Alison and I were walking through my hometown of Palo Alto, and I think just being home, these themes of, going back to the people you knew in your youth and kind of reflecting on who you were then versus who you are now and how you feel about that, all those themes just kind of made their way into the story, and that was the genesis.
And was this always something when you were writing it between the two of you? Did you always envision that Alison would star and you would direct? Was there ever a chance you were going to be in it? And how did that come about? The positions you guys had?
No, there was no moment that I was gonna act in it. I learned from the first movie that I directed that there's so much going on behind the camera that if I don't have to kind of run back and forth, that's ideal for me. And on top of that, there's so many great actors. And when we heard that Jay Ellis might be interested, we were like, absolutely, he's better for this part than me anyway. And so, if I can go forward and continue to direct and not act in the movies I direct, it's a lot easier for me to do that.
I need to see this through, whatever it is.
You mean like with you and the groom?
I mean, we can just call him Sean.
And it really comes through. And I think that aside from the characters being really relatable and really, really realistic, what struck me the most in this movie is just the killer soundtrack. Like, this has so many fantastic songs, all on my playlist too. Who picked the songs?
Yes. This is a great playlist. We have an amazing music supervisor, and Dave and I personally, invested a lot into this soundtrack. We wrote a lot of letters to artists that we love, like the Alabama Shakes. Dave and I, our song is "I Found You" by the Alabama Shakes, which is not in this movie, but just like, I think because that song by that band kicked off our love story, we really wanted to have some music by them in the movie and wrote an impassioned letter because we're such fans. And I'm just so glad you brought the soundtrack up, because we did fight for a lot of these tracks, and like, we wanted the whole movie to feel kind of comfortable and lived in, right? We're talking about going home, seeing all these people that from your life, like, that you've known for a long time. And all this music should feel really familiar and vibey and cool, but also a lot of them might not be tracks that you've heard before.
Yeah, and I think that's what's nice. It's a mix. It's not all brand new stuff. There's some older tracks there, and you're right. It's like going home again. You're hearing these songs that you haven't heard in a while. And out of all of the cast that you've got in here, you've got so many great performers, so many iconic people in here. What was it like getting Danny to come back to work with him again?
So fun to work with Danny again. Danny and I are very close. We've remained close friends since shooting Community, but we haven't been on set together since then. So it was awesome. I mean, I just feel like we didn't skip a beat. It felt like we walked off the set of Community, like onto the set of somebody I used to know, and we're just like up to our old antics. And, we're very lucky that Dave would just let the camera roll, and a lot of our little stuff made it in.
I told you she was cool.
She actually reminds me a lot of me at that age. Were you like a nudist?
I was.
I have an idea.
Keep your eyes on the iPad. Bradley Pitt Campbell, do not chase the naked lady.
Yeah, we're very proud of this soundtrack. It was a lot of songs that, yes, that mean a lot to us. Alabama Shakes is a band that from the very beginning, when Alison and I first met, like our like quote unquote song is from the Alabama Shakes, and so we wanted to get that in there. We somehow got away with a Bob Dylan song, a Graham Nash song. We have my favorite Phoenix song, "Love Like a Sunset Part 2," and it's this music that just feels timeless, and even some of the newer tracks, they feel that way, and that was kind of the general vibe we were going for. It's just things that's like, ooh, this is just like classic and timeless.
And getting to the end of the movie, when it gets to the end and the credits roll, then we get that nice little stinger at the end, that nice little scene. Yeah. Was that something that you just like, I have to put this in here?
Kind of, yeah. We wanted to have the audience leave with a nice little laugh and kind of connect everything back to the beginning of the movie in a way. But we realized after the fact that we might have missed another opportunity where at one point, Allison's character is talking about a different reality TV show about foods you can fuck. Yes. And we realized that there also could have been another little button to the movie where we would have begged Jason Biggs to be a part of this reality show and have him fuck different types of foods.
That would have been hilarious. I was, after the first one, just waiting to see if you were going to do them all. But that was fantastic. And I think that the other thing that I noticed in here, so you got a lot of great actors. You got a lot of young talent. You got like Kiersey Clemons and Jay Ellis. And then you've got established, legendary, iconic kind of people, Amy Sedaris and Julie Haggerty. What was it like working with them?
The best. We wrote that role with Julie Haggerty in mind. We never knew if we could, we never thought we'd actually get her. And she's so lovely. And she was only on set for a few days, but we all fell in love with her. And like, I think a lot of people know her from Airplane back in the day, which is so iconic in its own right. But we had seen her recently in Marriage Story, and we were like, oh man, she still has that, her specific Julie energy, but it's so grounded. And she just is able to like seamlessly kind of navigate back and forth between being this like sweet, comforting mother in the movie and also just being like riotously funny.